All right, hi there. So I've been driving around for officially over a month now, and I made a kind of impromptu video a couple days ago, and when I posted it, I realized that it had been well over a month since I had posted a video, and I was like, oh, I guess I just got distracted and forgot about that project. Indeed, I have been traveling, and fortunately, life has overtaken the art creative project part of me. That's good every once in a while. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think last week, I decided to add a couple stories to my story list of stories I want to tell. I have 147 stories, and I've recorded, 20 or 15 or something. Not very many. I don't need to record all of them, but I need to record at least 39. So that's my birthday project this year. And I've also just recorded other stories of me just talking about stuff. So I have a random number generator, and I just fiddled around to find a way that sounded pretty good to record it. Unfortunately, if I use these kind of headsets and they brush against my mustache or beard, it sounds like crackly beard noise. So this contraption, weird hanging it off these glasses things, works pretty well. And I have the phone propped up against the dash. Speedometer set at 77 as I barrel down Highway 17, heading back towards the Sedona area, but first, Arcosanti. However, I have some time, and so I have thought about it many times over the last month while driving that I'm like, I should record my stories while I'm driving. And I don't know if I committed to it. I think I may have committed to it, but I've decided, I was like, fuck, I should do this every day. So I'm doing this every day now. I could do it multiple times a day with all these days of driving. What about the days I'm not driving all day? Anyway, it seems like the trip is almost over. I'm late. I should have been there by now. Thanksgiving is 2 days away, and the initial due date of the van to get to Massachusetts was Thanksgiving, but my friend who gave me the van, also being a Gemini, was just like, well, yeah, but it doesn't need to be there. It could be there by then, but that's, and I said, well, does it need to be there? And he's like, no, it doesn't really matter. It'd be nice, but it's not important. So it's not going to be there by Thanksgiving. It's 2 days away. I have a few tasks that I must complete, like Grand Canyon and like parents and paperwork, and then there's days of driving. So I've already cut off a whole bunch of am I going to Texas? No, I'm not going to Texas. Am I going to Oklahoma? No, I'm not going to Oklahoma. I mean, I really wanted to go to Oklahoma, but really for reasons that weren't important, so I'm not going to Oklahoma. Nice people, I would have been nice to see. I'm not going to see them. I'll spend probably 2 nights in St. Louis, though. Why St. Louis? Old friend. And I've never spent time in St. Louis, and I almost remembered a monologue that I learned when I was a teenager about shoes. Whenever I see shoes, I think of traveling. Anyway, that's what I was bringing up, was something about the Glass Menagerie in St. Louis, but the kiss of Tennessee Williams is still on my drinking glass. So I ran my random number generator, and it was set at 80 when I turned it on. I don't remember if I touched it or shook it or if it just brought up 80. 80 is a different story. I pushed the random number generator, and it was 130. No, it was 36. It's 36. 36 is great. It's a great place to start because it's number 9. So we're going to tell story 36. 36 I had labeled The Sheikh's Kiss. I don't know where to start this story. In fact, I may just tell this whole story. Why not just tell the whole story? And which may be a couple different numbers, so I may go through and tick them off later. The story goes like this. Most of us know who Rumi is. Most of us know who Rumi is. Some of us got obsessed with Rumi at one point or another. A lot of people told me I should read Rumi. When I was living in Tucson, that's a nice connection because I'm in Arizona right now, and I was just visiting Tucson. When I was living in Tucson in 1997, I got to see an opera by Philip Glass and Robert Wilson called Monsters of Grace. And I thought it was amazing, and I thought the poetry was amazing, and I bought the libretto. And a year later, some guy in Portland was like, "You need to read Rumi. You need to read Rumi." And I was like, "Who's this Rumi guy? You need to read Rumi." And as soon as I started reading, he gave me some. And as soon as I started reading it, I was like, "Oh, this is the poetry that was used in Monsters of Grace." Like this. Whoo. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. The door is wide and open. There are people crossing back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is wide and open. Don't go back to sleep. See, the little pieces I remember. So I kind of got obsessed with Rumi. I mean, a lot of us who have read Rumi get obsessed with Rumi. It's beautiful, ecstatic poetry, and it's insane romantic love. It's drug addiction and bestiality and jabbering logorrhea. I mean, amazing, ecstatic, crazy wisdom. Wonderful experience of being a human. A lot of people fantasize about the whirling dervishes. Wow, what an experience. The whirling dervishes. What nice dresses and hats they wear. My mother had gotten me into some kind of, when I do that, when I say some kind of, it makes me think of a song. Some kind of sink in it. Some kind of false hairdo. James song off of Wawa. Frequency dip. So my mother got me into this book called The Ancient Secret of the Fountain of Youth. So many books have such terrible titles. These publishers change the titles of things into something they think will sell. It's terrible. Ancient Secret of the Fountain of Youth was originally called The Eye of Revelation, which is also a pretty terrible title, but that's fine. It was about some World War veteran who had was in war over in Asia somewhere and went back a few years later because he had heard about this ancient secret of the Fountain of Youth, and I think he ended up in Tibet or Nepal or something and was taught yoga qigong, some kind of yoga qigong thing, and it was rebranded as the Five Rites, and had a moment. And the first part of the Five Rites, this is like a miniature yoga set, basically. But if you do this every day, you can live forever. But if you do the sixth one, then you can be immortal, or you can live. You can stay young. You get younger. That's what it is. If you do it every day, you get younger. If you do the sixth one, you can be immortal, which is about never having sex again in a brahmacharya. They don't use those words in that. Anyway, the first rite of the Five Rites is spinning in a circle, and. My mother had me doing this, or my mother got me into doing this, and I did it, and I would teach people how to do it, and I loved it, and it was so much fun, and I don't do the Five Rites. I haven't in years, I don't think. I mean, I probably did it a few years ago in my naked yoga class, that I taught the guys to do it, but I just don't do it regularly. But there have been periods in my life, not just one period, there have been periods in my life from the age of 20 at least, that's when I first remember doing it, that I've done it regularly for months at a time, weeks or months at a time. So we get good at practicing spinning. We get good at standing and not falling over. Anything you do, you can practice, you can get good at it. So, which brings us back to dough. Once upon a time, I went to visit a lover in Amsterdam, and I did not like Amsterdam for no reason. I had this prejudice about Amsterdam that it was the toilet of Europe, because somebody had told me that all these assholes go there to party, and they get stoned, and they get drunk, and they fuck whores, and they vomit on everything, and they make a lot of noise, and it's ugly, and blah, 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 blah. So I had no interest in being in Amsterdam. And I like a lot of Americans, I had an internal puritanical prudishness. You might not think that about me, but I certainly did. I was just like, Amsterdam, who the fuck wants to go there? So, of course, I went to visit my lover, Leo, there in Amsterdam. He had been living there on sabbatical for 4 months, and he left me there after a couple weeks of taking me to piss parties and endless gay bars and walking through the red light districts, and it was charming. I decided to stay a little while longer, and then I met somebody who gave me an apartment. I guess connected with a radical fairy who gave me a place to live, and then met somebody else who gave me an apartment. So I ended up staying there for 3 months. And then I lost my wallet and it was stuck, or I lost my passport, and so I was stuck there for even another month after that. Stayed there on volition for 3 months and then was stuck for another month. It was like Amsterdam really liked me. And I find that I have this incredible karma with the Dutch. So while I was in Amsterdam, this radical fairy who had first given me a place to live connected me with another guy through the radical fairies. I don't remember the name now that he used as a radical fairy, because I didn't ever meet him as that. I just met him as a person. His name was Sebastian. Sebastian. Oh, what a name. So Sebastian was an artist, and I very quickly got involved in doing art projects with him. And we fell in love, let's say. And it was, I don't think we ever had sex. It wasn't about that. We fell in love in a different way. And it was very clear that there was a spiritual connection. All of his art is about what people might call spiritual. It's ritual. All of his art is ritual. So it's dealing with the energies in and around and behind and through the physicality and the emotionality and the creative. He's a wonderful person, and I love him very much. And so he invited me to go dance zikr with a bunch of Iranian refugees in Rotterdam, which I always love saying that. Doesn't that sound great? Iranian refugees in Rotterdam. And another lover of mine who's dead now, named Robert, had really loved this band called The Beautiful South, and there was a song of theirs called Rotterdam or Anywhere, and they talked about how Rotterdam had been so destroyed in the war that it had been rebuilt with no personality, and so it could be anywhere, and there was no reason to be there. So I had a kind of negative, and my Robert had played this song for me many times, and when I told him I was in Rotterdam, he sent it to me as well. I had a kind of negative impression of Rotterdam. But I went there for like a sex holiday for a couple days, and there were a lot of crackheads around, which was interesting because you don't see that in Amsterdam. They keep the hard drugs off the street. And in Rotterdam, there were lots of people with like burnt faces from freebasing and exploding pipes and shit. So I had some negative connotations. So when Sebastian invited me down to Rotterdam, I was like, oh, okay. And went to some like nowhere residential neighborhood and went into this house, and everybody was Iranian. And most of the Iranians had been living there for a while and had learned Dutch. So there are people speaking Farsi and people speaking Dutch, and not a lot of English going on. Some of the Dutch, of course, most of the Dutch were pretty good at speaking English, and some of the Iranians could speak English, but many of them could not. Many of them, their second language was Dutch, and they were stuck with that. Some of them had some English. So I was in this place. I was welcomed into this place. It was like this little house that had been converted into a temple, and there was a sheikh, and I was like, wow, a sheikh. Sheikh like had a turban on and a robe and some spiritual bling and long hair. His hands were meaty and strong. He was probably in his late 50s or early 60s. I thought he was hot as fuck. I was like, wow. I've always been super attracted to spiritual leaders and authority figures, but specifically spiritual authority figures. So I've been like attracted to priests and whatever, monks and anybody in that kind of thing. So Sheikh. So everybody called him Al-Gajun, which I later learned was like just dear father, which I guess, people call Catholic priest father. Father so-and-so, father something something. So the Sheikh did not speak any English. He was studying it, but he had no confidence in using it, so he'd never even try. And I don't even know if he spoke Dutch, but he certainly spoke Farsi. And we would get there, and there would be some meet and greets. They would do this kind of special handshake where they'd grab each other's hands and hold it against the forehead. It was a pervasive feeling of love, of open-heartedness, which honestly at the time I was not adept in, but I certainly reveled in it. I was 23. So I had short hair. And it was, zikr is a chanting, ecstatic dance form of worship. It's a Sufi ritual. And the Sheikh would start it off, I think he would start it off by everybody sitting around quietly, and he would read from Rumi's book in Farsi. So I would just sit there, it's hard enough to understand any Dutch, but it is somewhat Germanic. I mean, it is Germanic, so I could, if people are speaking Dutch around me, I could gather meanings out of what they were saying after my ear had attuned to it. But Farsi, I was totally lost. However, it's fucking gorgeous, Farsi, the language. So I would just sit there and listen to Gajun reading things in Farsi, and it was Rumi, and I was like, this is amazing. And that would go on for, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes or something, and then there was a little call and response kind of thing, which didn't make any sense to me. And then there was zikr, dancing. So we'd all get up, and most of the Iranians would kind of like keep their hands down by their side and chant rhythmically and kind of bow. And then there were some people spinning. And so being the hippie that I was, I had this, the young, ignorant American hippie that I was, I had this sense that I could just do whatever I wanted. Because, there's these people bowing, and there's these people spinning, and there's people whatever the fuck. So I was, like, hippie dancing. I was connecting with the energy, the vibe in the room, but innately. I wasn't really conscious of it, necessarily. But I was really into, again, these 5 rites, and these Reiki, and different types of energy movement, yoga. So I'm allowing the prana to flow. I'm moving, but I'm like, dancing like a hippie to this chanting, it's Iranian, whatever, prayer. And after going there like 3 times, 2 or 3 times, it was pretty early. The son of the Sheikh, who spoke English very well, took me aside and he said, Dominic, we like you a lot. We really do. So we want to tell you what's going on here so that you get more out of it. And we're going to teach you how to dance. And at first I was kind of offended that I was being told that I was dancing wrong, or that I was supposed to dance in a certain way, because the reactionary, like, you can't tell me what to do. But they just explained the bowing thing. And he was like, it's a simpler thing than what you're doing. What you're doing is actually, we understand what you're doing and it's good, but that's not what we're doing here. So, they taught me the simple bowing dance thing. So it was only like another 2 or 3 times, but again, this was once a week. We'd go every Friday. So it was only 2 or 3 times of the bowing dancing that, again, the Sheikh's son came to me and asked me if I would be a dervish. Now, the bowing dancing thing was very different than the free-formed hippie dancing that I was doing, and that the free-formed hippie dancing I was doing, there was always a little bit of ego, confusion, am I doing this right? Like, how long is this going on? What's happening? There was a lot of self still in that process. The bowing thing has a lot to do with renouncing that. And I didn't really understand that, but the bowing thing is hypnotic. You're moving your head and your upper body like this, and you're standing, and everything's dropping. The energy is shedding, this rhythmic. And so it really helped be in that space and in the energy and rolling in the waves of the people. being one with God, one with Allah. I remember it was very ecstatic, right? The zikr is very ecstatic. So we'd be doing this bowing, and then when the cycle ended or the dance ended, which might be 40 minutes or an hour, the Sheikh and some of the other men, the Sheikh would say things in Farsi, and the only thing I remember, which I think is Arabic actually, is La ilaha illallah, Allah lakhve, Allah, what is something like, I don't remember. I just phonetically remember. But when he would say these phrases, the rest of the men in the room, I don't remember if the women would do it, but the rest of the men in the room would be, hoo, 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 which I later found out is a name for God. Like a lot of people, when they think of Islam, they think, the name of God is Allah. Allah, Allah. And Allah isn't any more the name for God than God is the name for God. As far as I understand, Allah is everything and nothing. Alpha and Omega, all that is and all that isn't. That is God. The word God is from Old Germanic, the good one. It doesn't mean anything. It's not the name of God. When people are like, God damn it! And people are like, don't take the name of God in vain. It's not God's name. It's just a word that talks about that thing that is infinite and deified. The good one. It's the good one as opposed to the bad one. Allah is everything. So then there's different names that you can give Allah, and they're very anti, iconography, so I don't know if the names stand for deity aspects of Allah. If, like in Catholicism or Christianity, some branches of Christianity, there's only one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, all that is seen and unseen. There's only one God, but depending on which branch of Christianity you're in, there's worshiping Jesus, or there's worshiping Mary, or there's worshiping John the Baptist and Saint Joseph and Saint Anthony, all the different saints. In some cultures, there's saint days and you're worshiping saints all the fucking time. So it becomes polytheistic. There are deities, immortal beings that have somehow been preserved in the heavens that you can ask favors of and give your heart to, because that is the price that gods extract. Your heart, your attention, your love, your care, your being, your life. So I don't know if who is like has a face or a story or a unique extraction of being, but he would say these phrases, and then the men would go who, and then sometimes they'd make other sounds, and they asked me then if I would be a dervish. And so, what's dervishing? They said what you were doing before we taught you how to bow was being a dervish. So we'd like you to be a dervish in the proper way and just spin. And they didn't give me any instruction. They just said spin. And I had a lot of practice in spinning from the 5 rights practice. So I started spinning. But in the 5 rights practice, you start off spinning as many times as you can. That might be 3, that might be 7, that might be 8. Just spin, 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 stop. Because it's important you don't fall over. Weebles wobble and they don't fall down. Where am I? I'm going to Arcosanti. So in the zikr, again, like I said, it goes on for a half hour to an hour, or longer or shorter or something. So I was like, okay, I didn't think about this beforehand, but I'm giving it as a context because I would start spinning, and I was just like, holy shit, I'm just spinning. Instead of like the 5 rights where I'd be counting the spinning, I would just spin. And I think somebody naturally showed me that one hand is meant to be up and one hand is meant to be down. And so I would start spinning. I would start spinning with a certain amount of presence and effort, choice. I'm spinning. You have to move your feet to propel yourself. But the energy in the room, again, I said there's this shedding or shirking from the bowing, and the chanting. There's a offering of the heart. Again, Sufism isn't really Islam. It's Persian. It's Middle Eastern, so it's infused with Islam, but it's not really Islam. Much like yoga isn't necessarily Hinduism, but it's infused in Hinduism, and therefore it's thought of as Hindu so often. I'm on a dirt road. I hope this doesn't make it impossible to hear me. So all this energy in the room that people are shirking and that people are offering. So again, like even in Taoism or most types of spirituality, there's a... God, this road is so terrible. Hi. There's an exchange that you need to let go of energy in order to receive energy. You need to release energy to make space for energy to pass through you. You're a conduit and you're infinite. You also take up a certain amount of space. You have a certain amount of capacity that can be expanded because it's actually infinite. Energies can compact into anything, any space, any amount of energy. It can get hot, obviously. So the energy is flowing through the room. There's the energy people are releasing. There's the energy people are praying for. There's the energy people are receiving. And the dervish becomes this gigantic conduit, this gigantic pipe. So I'm feeling the life force, the various forms of life force, of deity force, of being flowing through me as the dervish. It's making me spin. I feel like I'm levitating. I'm no longer putting any effort into my feet. I'm just like and flowing. There's no dizziness. There's no effort. There's no stress. I don't know. I got complimented by the Sufis later about what a great dervish I was. But it was an amazing experience to be a dervish in that space, to have this authentic opportunity to experience what Sufism is. Authentic in such a way that it's in a foreign land because they're refugees, so they are open to the dominant culture that they know that they are just a part of. Whereas if I had gone to Iran, it would be harder for me to be accepted into an authentic Sufi circle and into authentic zikr. And it's not something that I would have ever thought to do anyway. This is a gift from the universe that's bringing me in there. Even though I loved Rumi, I'm anti-religion so often, especially back then, so I wouldn't have been like, I'm going to go learn about Sufis. So, pulling the threads together, right? So I love the Sheikh. I have a sexual attraction to him based in my physical type and in my tendency to be super attracted to men with spiritual authority. He doesn't speak any English. That's hot. He has long hair. That's hot. He's got really meaty hands. He's a Taurus. I don't like gurus, and I'm talking about this person who I was at the time, don't like gurus, have issues with authority, and so I don't treat him the way other people do, and I feel a hardness and a reservation in the heart to specifically keep that energy out of my heart, to want to supplicate myself as a child and sit at his feet and be like a worshiper. I don't worship gurus and shit. But he can tell that I love him. He can tell that I love him, and he invites me, again, through, not his son at this time, I think a man named Muri, if I remember correctly, invites me through another Iranian fellow who can speak English well to spend the night. And so, of course, I'm fantasizing that I'm going to have sex with him. But that's not what happened. and this is called the Sheikh's kiss, but I didn't get to have sex on. And I get to spend the night. There's a really nice. This is a nice sidebar. I think I spent the night at his house 2 or 3 times, and one of them. Very often, actually, when I was there, the different Iranians would make comments to me about how I was so handsome. The men would make comments to me about how I was so handsome that I must have sex with 22 women a day. And I was like, that's an odd thing to say to someone. And I heard it frequently. So one night I was spending the night there and I was talking to Maury and I said, so I have a question. Again, I'm 20. That's part of the story. I have a question. People keep saying to me that that they expect me to have sex with 22 people a day. I give off this energy. He was like, "Yes, you give off a lot of sexual energy." And I said, "Would it be a problem if I had sex with 22 men a day?" And his response was very interesting to me. He didn't look shocked. He looked a little confused, but he said, "What age are you?" That was his response. And that really confused me and put me off. I was like, "What?" I said, "I'm 23. Why?" And he said, "Oh, well, everyone has sex with men growing up, or every man has sex with men growing up, but when you turn 18, you're supposed to get married and stop having sex with men and only have sex with your wife." And that's not an explanation of sexuality I had ever heard before, and certainly not in Western culture, and it's not something I expected at all to hear from somebody from Middle Eastern culture. And we were both dumbfounded, or standing there awkwardly for a moment, and I said, "Are you married?" And he said, "No." The conversation ended. So I would usually stay at night, and the Sheikh wouldn't be hanging around after the zikr. He would go back to his upstairs private quarters or something, which is disappointing because I remember both 2 or 3 times I stayed there that I had this hope that the Sheikh would send someone down to, tell me to come up and spend the night in his bed with him or something. But instead, I would just sleep on the floor. And the first time I spent the night, one of the times I spent the night, there was a Sharaf Shams, a ritual, I think it was a vernal equinox celebration, which is the beginning of their year, and he made me a little amulet using a Dremel and a piece of brass, and blessing. I lost it on the travels. And the second time, whoever was being the translator was like, "Okay, the Sheikh wants to teach you something." So the Sheikh writes out a codex relating the Farsi letters to the English phoneme system. So I've told this story recently, and people don't necessarily know what the word phoneme means. So phonemes are the sounds that make up a language. So if you think of the cliches of German or French, those are really good examples, because Spanish is good too. But you think of how they have totally different, like in a Spanish sound, they have the L's together and they're like yeah, and the N's like año. We don't use those sounds the same way in English. And so the French have a lot of u, and even the Germans have a lot of u, but they have a z. They have harder sounds than so when we hear other languages, we hear sounds that we don't make, and it seems foreign and strange to us. So the phonemes are what make up a language, and the letters describe the phonemes. And as of course from whatever language you speak, a letter may actually represent many different phonemes. So A, E, I, O, U have long, short, and hard vowel sounds and all those things. So he wrote out the Farsi letters as they related to the English phoneme system. So there were more than 26, and there were some that covered diphthongs and so on and so forth. And there were numerical values associated with each of the Farsi letters. And he showed me that if I added my birth name, my first name, plus my mother's first name and divided by 12, you get the astrological sun sign you're born under. And I'd been studying astrology for 2 years. I grew up thinking astrology was total bullshit. And I'd been studying astrology for 2 years. And when he showed me this, I'd been studying astrology for 2 years, but I was always thinking this astrology is bullshit. I mean, it's not even lined up with what's going on in the stars, and there's all this garbage, horoscope garbage, and there was a part of me that just, Even though I found a lot of usefulness in astrology, and when I gave readings to people, they were really impressed with how accurate I was. There was a part of me that always doubted what the fuck was happening in astrology. But when he showed me this, when he showed me that that this somehow, the first names, which I always seemed kind of arbitrary and random, this was early in the life of me using the name Dominic Vine, I was like, okay, that's fucked up. And I used it, I tried it with 10 people that I knew, their birth name and their mother's first name, or their birth date and their mother's first name. And was shocked to find that it worked with 9 of the 10 people. That adding the numerical value using this Farsi codex of their first name with their mother's first name, I got the astrological sun sign they were born under. That's pretty crazy. So this is just an example of the magic. So I ended up leaving Amsterdam and traveling, and when I came back in October, because of a friend who wanted to go to Amsterdam, blah, blah, blah. When I came back to the Netherlands, Sebastian told me it was very important that the Sheikh wanted to see me. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So the Sheikh was coming up to Amsterdam to do a ritual at Sebastian's house. Oh, can you hear this? Fuck, sorry. So the Sheikh was coming back up to Amsterdam to do a ritual at Sebastian's house. And I was there for it. And it was the same kind of zikr that we'd have down in Rotterdam, but it was at Sebastian's house. And then, the Sheikh's son took me aside and he was like, the Sheikh really wants to do something with you personally. And I was like, oh, okay. The Sheikh took me upstairs to Sebastian's bedroom. And again, he didn't speak English. And his son told me, before we went upstairs, the son told me that the Sheikh wanted to give me a blessing and an empowerment to be a carrier of the Sufi lineage and bring Sufism to America. I was confused, honored, but didn't know what that meant. I sometimes feel guilty that I haven't done more to bring Sufism to America, but to a certain degree, I am regarded as a spiritual ecstatic, so I'm doing part of that work. Anyway, the Sheikh and I go up to Sebastian's bedroom, private, and I'm like, oh God, what's going to happen now? There was an amazing energy that, again, I still, at this point in time, only associated with sexuality, of feeling him get intimate with me. And he spoke to me in Farsi, something I couldn't understand. He said like a ritual over me. And then he kissed me. But he didn't just kiss me, he kissed me, filling me with his breath, which is something that I've always really liked sexually, to kiss somebody and breathe into them and receive their breath and like do that until we almost black out, make that kind of connection through the lungs and the heart. He kissed me, filling me with his breath, and saying the sound again, hu, and another sound I hadn't heard called rap. And he just showed me after kissing me with his breath, or maybe before kissing me with his breath, that when you breathe in, you can say rap, and when you breathe out, you can say hu. And he said that I should do this all the time, and it will bring, me this spiritual peace, a spiritual power, which I never did very much, because I didn't understand it. I felt like I really squandered the blessing, but I also I didn't ask for it. I didn't know what to do with it, and I, again, was kind of anti-religious. I was like, I don't know if I want to be a part of this. And he's dead now. But all seeds will grow in time if they're viable in good soil. So maybe someday it will grow in me. Or maybe I'm not the one. But that's the story of the Sheikh's kiss. This actually happened. Much love to them.